Today, I'm going to tell you a story so quiet, it hurts so heavy it stays with you long after the last word fades. Out in the merciless Arizona territory, where the sun burns truth into bone, and the desert remembers every footprint it shouldn't have allowed, two worlds collided in silence. It began with one small forbidden mark on sacred ground, a single footprint, and a torn scrap of calico beside a spring that had never known a white woman's touch. That tiny violation was enough to pull a renegade Apache warrior and a discarded schoolteacher into a path neither could turn back from. A path of blood-broken oaths, children crying in smoke, and a final ritual that could never be made whole again. The wind had died completely, leaving the canyon in a hush so deep it pressed against the eardrums. Kane sat cross-legged on the flat stone beside the thin ribbon of water that fed the sacred spring. The pool was no wider than a man's outstretched arms, yet it carried the memory of every rain that had fallen on these mountains since the first people walked here. He had come to listen, as he always did, when the world felt wrong. Now the world was wrong in a new way. A single footprint marred the damp margin of the spring, small narrow the heel worn from cheap boots. Not Apache. White. And caught on the low branch of the mesquite that overhung the water was a scrap of faded calico torn from a dress still holding the faint sour smell of sweat and fear. Kane did not touch it. He did not need to. The cloth had already brushed the wrong place. He remained motionless. The sun burned the back of his neck, but he felt only the slow tightening in his chest, the way the silence itself seemed to lean closer, waiting for him to decide what it already knew. The mountain spirits did not speak in words. They spoke in absence. No hawk cry, no rustle of lizard on rock, no whisper of cottonwood leaves. Kane had withdrawn. The land remembered. Kane's gaze drifted upward past the sheer red wall, where the waterfall curtained the hidden mouth of the sanctuary. His grandmother, Neela, had first shown him that place when he was small enough to ride on her shoulders. She had taught him the proper way to approach water, never step across it, never speak loudly near it, never let anything foreign touch its edge, unless the spirits permitted. The footprint and the rag were not permitted. He exhaled once slowly. The breath carried no sound. Far below, miles across the scrub and broken rock, Copper Ridge squatted under its own dust cloud. He could not see the wooden platform outside Henley's store, but he knew it was there. He had watched the town for 3 days now, the way a wolf watches a lame calf. They had dragged a woman out in irons. Pale hair matted with dirt, green eyes scanning faces that would not meet hers. They called her thief. They called her worse. And now they meant to give her to him, as though a living woman were no different from a steer or a sack of grain. Kane rose without hurry. The paint horse lifted its head from sparse grass, ears flicking. He laid a hand along its neck, warm, steady, and felt the animal settle. No words passed between them. None were needed. He looked once more at the footprint, at the scrap of calico trembling in the still air. The land had noticed. The land would not forget. If he rode away now, turned back into the high canyons, and left the town to its own poison, the spring would still be fouled in the eyes of the spirits. The violation would remain small, but permanent, like a scar on skin that never quite heals. If he went down to the platform, claimed the woman they offered, he would step openly into their story, become the monster they already named him. Either way, something would be lost. He mounted in one fluid motion. The sorrel mare waited farther down the trail, saddled and ready, as though she had known he would need her. Kane did not look back at the spring. There was no need. It would wait. The trail dropped steeply toward the flatlands. Dust rose behind the paint's hooves in a thin veil that caught the sun and turned gold. Below the town waited its wooden buildings, small and brittle, against the vastness of the desert. The silence followed him. It followed all the way down. The sun hammered down on Copper Ridge like a forge hammer on iron, turning the air thick and metallic with dust and sweat. Clara stood chained to the rough pine platform in front of Henley's store, wrists raw under the cold bite of the irons. The wood beneath her bare feet was splintered and hot. Every shift sent fresh pain up her legs. Faces ringed her miners with blackened hands, women clutching shawls, children held back by mothers who whispered too loudly. No one met her eyes for long. She kept her chin up. Not pride. Just the last thing left to hold on to. From the edge of the settlement, half hidden in the thin shade of a cottonwood, Kane watched. The paint horse stood motionless beneath him, ears pricked forward. He had ridden in slow keeping to the low ground until the last possible moment. Now the town knew he was here. Heads turned, whispers spread like dry grass catching fire. Sheriff Cal Decker stepped forward, hand resting on the butt of his Colt. The leather creaked when his fingers flexed. "We offer tribute," he called, voice carrying over the murmur. "For safe passage. For peace." Kane did not answer at once. He let the silence stretch. The crowd shifted uneasy. A woman, Maud Henley, spat into the dust. Should have thought of consequences, she muttered loud enough to carry. Clara's gaze found him then. Across the distance, through the heat, shimmer, their eyes locked. Hers held no plea, only the flat recognition of someone who had already been discarded. His held nothing the town could read. He urged the paint forward. The horse moved without sound, hooves sinking into the soft dirt of the street. When he reached the platform, he dismounted in one motion, boots striking ground with deliberate weight. The crowd drew back half a step. Decker's thumb brushed the hammer of his revolver. "She's convicted. Theft. Moral turpitude. Yours if you want her." Kane looked at Clara. Not at the irons, not at the torn calico clinging to her skin. At her eyes. Then he turned to Decker. "You offer what you have already thrown away." A ripple went through the watchers. Harlan Cole, standing near the store door in his good broadcloth, cleared his throat. "We're prepared to add cattle." "Horses." "Whatever, keep your cattle," Kane said. The words were quiet, but they carried. He drew the knife from his belt, short, practical, the blade darkened from use, and stepped onto the platform. The wood groaned under his weight. Clara did not flinch when the steel flashed near her wrists. The rope binding the chain to the post parted with a soft snap. The irons themselves he left. Not mercy, practicality. They would slow her if she tried to run later. He met her gaze again. "Can you write?" She nodded once, throat too dry for words. He whistled low. The sorrel mare appeared from behind the livery, as though summoned reins trailing. No one had seen him bring her. Kane helped Clara mount, hands firm under her elbow, careful not to linger. She settled into the saddle, awkwardly chains clinking, but she sat straight. The crowd watched in stunned quiet. A child started to cry and was hushed. Kane swung up on the paint. He looked back at them, once Decker, Cole, Maud, Henley, the faces that had condemned her without trial. "This land remembers," he said. The words were soft, almost lost in the wind that had started again, stirring dust devils along the street. He turned the paint east. Clara followed on the sorrel. The irons on her wrists caught the sun in dull flashes as they rode out of town. Behind them, the whispers began again. Louder now, angry, the kind of talk that ends with rifles and posies. Kane did not look back. Neither did Clara. The desert swallowed them both. The fire was small, fed with dry mesquite that snapped and threw brief sparks into the dark. Kane had chosen the spot carefully, a narrow red rock cleft where the walls held the heat and the smoke rose straight thin as a knife blade before the night swallowed it. 3 hours of riding had left the horses lathered and breathing hard. Now they stood hobbled nearby, heads, low tails switching at invisible flies. Clara sat on the opposite side of the flame's knees, drawn up the irons still loose around her wrists like cold bracelets she could not remove. Kane passed her the leather water bag without a word. She drank in small, careful swallows, then handed it back. He offered strips of dried venison, next dark tough, salted with desert herbs. She took one, chewed slowly. The meat tasted of smoke and iron, but it filled the hollow ache in her stomach. She spoke first, voice low, as though testing whether the words would still come out. They said, I seduced the boy, Timothy Cole. Said I made him steal from his father's safe to pay my debts. She stared into the fire. I only helped him read. He came after school, struggled with the words. I thought he wanted to please his father. A pause longer than the last. They believed him. No one asked me. Kane listened without moving. His face stayed shadowed, unreadable in the flickering light. When she finished, he simply nodded once. No questions. No comfort offered. The silence between them thickened, broken only by the pop of sap in the wood. Then a new sound, soft footfalls on sand. Kane did not startle. He had felt the approach minutes earlier the way air changes when kin draws near. Reyes stepped from the darkness, tall tattooed arms crossed over his chest. Cruz and Talon followed a pace behind faces, half-lit eyes fixed on Kane. No greeting, no warmth. Reyes spoke in Apache, low and even. You bring her to the valley. White woman. Her feet have touched the spring. Her cloth has brushed the sacred water. Kane answered in the same tongue, quiet. She did not know. She does not need to know. The land knows. Reyes's gaze shifted to Clara. She felt the weight of it like a hand on her neck, though he never looked directly at her. You carry her like kin. You cut her chains. You give her your horse. What is she to you? Kane did not answer at once. He fed another stick to the fire. The flames licked higher for a moment, throwing his face into sharp relief scar along the jaw, eyes steady, but tired. Cruz shifted his weight. Talon's hand rested near the knife at his belt. The silence stretched until it hurt. Reyes spoke again. If you keep her, you bring pollution. The spirits withdraw. The water turns bitter. You know this. Kane met his cousin's eyes. I know. Then send her back. Let the town finish what they started. Keep the valley clean. Clara understood none of the words, but she read the tension in Kane's shoulders, the way his fingers tightened on the strip of meat he had not yet eaten. She felt the shift in the air, something breaking, small but final. Kane looked at her then. Not long. Just long enough. Then back to Reyes. I will not send her back. Reyes exhaled through his nose, a sound like wind through dry grass. He studied Kane a moment longer, then turned without another word. Cruz and Talon followed. Their footsteps faded into the night. No farewell, no blessing, only the absence they left behind. The fire settled lower. Kane stared into it. Clara's voice came soft. What did they say? He waited before answering. They call me traitor already. She swallowed. The irons clinked faintly when she moved her hands. Somewhere far off, carried on the night wind, a thin sound rose high desperate. Children crying, not close, not yet close enough to ignore. Kane lifted his head. The crying came again, faint, but unmistakable, threaded with the crackle of distant flame. He stood slowly. The paint horse lifted its ears. Clara watched him. "What is that?" Kane did not answer. He only looked toward the sound, the direction of smoke that had not been there an hour before. The fire popped once, sending a spark upward into the dark. He reached for his lance. The crying carried on the wind like thin threads of smoke, faint at first, then sharper as the horses crested the low ridge. Kane reined in the paint. Clara pulled the sorrel up beside him. Below them, in a shallow bowl of land, the Patterson place burned. The cabin was already gone, to flame timbers cracking like bones under the heat roof, collapsing inward with a slow groan that sent sparks wheeling into the dark. The barn stood half-eaten, its walls glowing orange from inside. 2 bodies lay in the yard, a man sprawled near the corral gate, rifle still clutched in stiff fingers. A woman a few paces away, apron scorched black. No movement, no sound from them now. The crying came again from the root cellar, muffled by earth and smoke. Small voices, children. Clara's hands tightened on the reins. Her breath caught short and ragged. She saw the schoolhouse in Copper Ridge flicker behind her eyes, the small hands raised for answers, the way Toby's age had looked at her with trust she had not earned. The irons on her wrists felt heavier, suddenly cold metal biting skin already raw. Kane sat motionless. The firelight painted half his face in shifting red. He stared down at the burning place without blinking. The reservation warriors had come and gone. Fast strike horses, taken supplies, stripped. They had left the children to the smoke because children did not ride, did not fight, did not matter in war. That was the law they followed now. Kane knew it. He had watched it happen before. The crying weakened, a cough wet and small. He exhaled once slow. The sound was almost lost in the crackle below. Clara turned to him. "We can't just—" He did not look at her. His gaze stayed on the cellar doors, wooden planks already smoldering at the edges, smoke pouring thick and black from the gaps. Another cough. Fainter. Kane swung down. Boots struck dirt. He handed the paint's reins to Clara without a word. She took them, fingers trembling. He moved toward the homestead, low and steady, keeping to the shadows thrown by the burning barn. Clara dismounted after him. The sorrel stamped once, uneasy at the smell of fire. She followed anyway, steps uncertain on the uneven ground. They reached the cellar. Heat rolled off the doors like breath from an open oven. Kane gripped the iron handles, metal already warm, and heaved. The hinges screamed. Smoke billowed out stinging eyes, coating throats. Clara coughed, sleeve pressed to her mouth. Inside, 3 small shapes huddled against the far wall. Sadie, the oldest, held Maisie tight. Toby clung to his sister's skirt, face streaked with soot and tears. Their eyes caught the sudden light, wide, terrified. Kane stepped down first. Clara followed. The roof groaned overhead, timbers shifting. Sadie's voice cracked. Mama Clara knelt. "We're getting you out." "Hold my hand." Kane lifted Toby without hesitation, small body light shaking. The boy buried his face in Kane's shoulder-muffling sobs. Kane carried him up the steps, shielding the child with his body, as embers rained down. Clara guided the girls. Sadie stumbled once on the narrow stairs. Clara caught her elbow, pulled her forward. Smoke thickened burning lungs. The roof gave a final warning crack. They emerged into the yard just as the cabin's last wall folded inward. Flames roared up, swallowing what remained. Kane set Toby down near the corral fence, far enough from heat. Clara pulled the girls close, shielding their faces from the sight of the bodies. For a long moment, no one spoke. Only the fire talked, snapping, hissing, devouring. Kane scanned the ridgeline. Shadows moved there, brief gone. One shape lingered longer than the rest. Yuma. Watching, not approaching, not helping, just bearing witness. Kane met Clara's eyes over the children's heads. "Children are children," he said. The words were quiet, final. She nodded once. Tears cut clean tracks through the soot on her cheeks. The firelight flickered across them all. 2 adults, 3 children, and the burning ruin of a home that would never stand again. From the ridge, Yuma turned and melted into the dark. The crying had stopped, but the night had not. The sun had climbed halfway, bleaching the sky to bone white. Dust rose in thin veils behind the horses' hooves, settling on skin and tongue like fine ash. Kane rode point the paint, stepping sure over cracked earth. Behind him, Clara kept the sorrel steady. Sadie and Maisie doubled up in front of her small hands, clutching the saddle horn. Toby rode with Kane's small body pressed against his back, arms locked around his waist since the homestead. The boy had not spoken since the fire. They crossed a low saddle of rock and dropped into a narrow draw. Kane slowed. The horses blew softly, grateful for the brief shade thrown by a lone pinon. He dismounted first, boots grinding into gravel. The others followed. Clara lifted the girls down. Toby slid off the paint without help, but stayed close to Kane's leg. Ahead lay the spring, a thin seep of water, trickling from a cleft in the red rock, pooling in a shallow basin no bigger than a washtub. Kane had come here as a boy. Nala had brought him, shown him how to cup the water without stirring sediment, how to speak the old words low so the spirits would hear. She had taught him the prayer for rain when the sky stayed empty too long. The basin had always run clear then. Now the water was clouded brown. Ox tracks cut deep ruts across the outflow. Wagon wheels had grooved the bank. Scattered nearby lay the picked bones of a buffalo rib's bleached skull, half buried in sand bullet holes punched through the heavy bone. Someone had shot it for sport or spite and left the meat to rot. Flies droned over the remains. The smell of old death hung low. Kane stood at the edge of the basin. He did not kneel. He did not touch the water. His hands stayed loose at his sides, but the knuckles showed white. Clara watched him from a few paces back. The children clustered near her, silent. She saw the way his shoulders held themselves rigid, as though bearing an unseen weight. The silence around him was heavier than any she had felt before, deeper than the quiet after the fire at the homestead. She understood now this was not just a spring. It was memory. It was law. And it was dying. The seep still trickled, but slower. The wagon ruts had dammed part of the flow. The pool shrank visibly in the heat edges, crusting with alkali. If the reservation warriors kept pushing war, more wagons would come. More bones, more tracks. The land would forget how to give. Kane's gaze drifted to Toby. The boy stared at the bones, then up at Kane, eyes wide and questioning. No words, just the look. Clara stepped closer. "We need water for them," she said quietly. "They're thirsty." He nodded once, slow. He took the leather bag from his belt, filled it from the clearest part of the pool, careful not stirring the mud. He handed it to Clara first. She passed it to the children. They drank in small sips, faces smeared with grime and relief. When the bag came back empty, Kane filled it again. For the horses. For later. He did not drink himself. The sun pressed harder. Shadows shortened. Fort Bowie lay a few hours north, low adobe walls, the faint glint of a flagpole. Kane mounted again. The others followed. They rode on in silence. The draw fell behind them, the fouled spring shrinking to a memory no one could wash clean. Near the last rise before the outpost came into view, Kane reined in. The paint stamped once uneasy. Below the fort squatted against the horizon stockade fence, smoke from cook fires, the American flag, limp in the still air. Kane looked at it a long time. "I cannot go closer," he said. The words came flat final. Clara shifted Toby in front of her. The boy's arms tightened around her waist. She met Kane's eyes. "They need you too," she said. He did not answer at once. His gaze stayed on the flag, red and white stripes stirring faintly now, as though the wind had remembered to breathe. From a distant ridge to the east, shadows moved. Matto and his warriors' dark shapes against the sky lances catching light. Preparing, waiting. Kane exhaled once. Then he touched the paint's neck and started down the slope. The others followed. The flag grew larger. The waterfall roared steady behind them, a white curtain that hid the narrow slit in the rock. Inside the sanctuary, the air was cool and damp, smelling of wet stone and old smoke from long-ago fires. Oil lamps burned low in carved niches, throwing soft yellow across the pictograph spirals, dear human figures with raised arms that had watched generations come and go. Kane had led Clara here after the children were delivered to the fort's edge. She had followed without question, the irons finely struck off by his knife, in a quiet moment on the trail. The metal rings still left faint red bands on her wrists. She sat now on a low stone bench back against the wall, watching Kane move through the chamber with deliberate slowness. He checked the small cache of supplies, dried meat, a few arrows, the lance propped against the rock. His hands lingered on the shaft thumb, brushing the place where one eagle feather had once been tied. Footfalls echoed from the passage, soft, familiar. Kane did not turn. He knew the rhythm. Reyes stepped into the lamplight, first Cruz and Talon behind him. No greeting. Their faces were set hard shadows pooling under cheekbones. Reyes's eyes went straight to the lance, and then to Clara. "You brought her here," Reyes said in Apache. The words came flat without heat. "Into the place of the first people." Kane faced them. "She needed shelter. She is white. She carries the smell of their iron and their broken promises." Reyes stepped closer. "And you carried children, white children, out of the fire. You rode with them to the Bluecoats' walls." Kane did not deny it. He stood still, breathing even. Cruz spoke low. "The reservation men talk of Fort Bowie. They will strike soon. You know this. And still you plan to warn them." Talon shifted hand near his knife. The silence stretched thin. Kane looked at each of them in turn. "I saved what could be saved. Children do not choose their wars." Reyes reached out. His fingers closed on the single remaining eagle feather tied near the lance head, the last one Neela had given Kane before the long walk took her strength. He pulled it free with a slow, deliberate tug. The sinew parted without sound. He held the feather between them, like evidence. "You are no longer welcome here," Reyes said. The words carried no anger, only finality. "The valley closes to you. The spirits have seen." Kane watched the feather in his cousin's hand. His face did not change, but something in the set of his jaw tightened, a small fracture no one but Clara might have noticed. Clara stood slowly. She did not speak. She only moved to stand beside Kane close enough that her shoulder brushed his arm. Her eyes stayed on Reyes, not defiant, just present. Reyes looked at her once long enough to read what he needed, then back to Kane. No more words passed. He turned. Cruz and Talon followed. Their shadows slid along the pictographs and vanished into the passage. The waterfall's roar filled the chamber again. Kane stared at the empty place where the feather had been. His fingers flexed once, then stilled. Clara spoke quietly. "They took something from you." He did not answer right away. When he did, His voice was low. "This is the point of no return." He reached for the lance. The shaft felt lighter without the feather, less balanced, less whole. He gripped it anyway. Outside the curtain of water, the night had deepened. Kane led the way through the narrow ledge, Clara close behind. The horses waited on the far side, restless in the mist. They mounted without hurry. From a high outcrop above the falls, Yuma watched. He had come alone, silent as shadow. He saw them ride out two figures against the dark rock heading north toward the fort. He did not follow close. He only stood arms folded, letting the spray wet his shoulders. The night closed around them. Somewhere ahead, the faint glow of Fort Bowie's fires began to show against the horizon. The night held its breath before dawn. They lay flat on the high rock ledge, bellies to cold stone, the wind scraping low across the desert floor below. Fort Bowie sprawled in the distance, low adobe walls. Faint lantern glow the flagpole, a thin black line against the paling sky. No sound reached them yet, only the steady pulse of their own breathing and the faint metallic taste of dust on the tongue. Kane shifted once. His hand moved to the small deerskin pouch at his belt. He untied the rawhide drawstring with slow fingers. Inside lay the last of Neela's ashes, fine gray powder carried through years of wandering kept. For the day, the words failed, and only ritual remained. He tipped a pinch into his palm. The ash felt cool against the heat of his skin. Clara watched from beside him. She did not speak. She had learned the weight of his silences by now, the way they carried more than words ever could. Her own breath came shallow, fogging briefly in the chill. The irons were gone, but the memory of them lingered in the faint red lines on her wrists. Kane opened his hand over the rock. The ash drifted down in a thin veil, settling into cracks and hollows. He spoke no prayer aloud. The words had lived inside him since Neela first whispered them during the long walk, when soldiers drove them south, when children fell, and did not rise when she carried him on her back until her own legs gave. The promise had been simple then: protect what lives, no matter the skin it wears. Usin had heard it. The mountain spirits had witnessed it. Now the ash touched earth. No wind stirred to scatter it. It clung dark against the gray stone, irreversible. Below, a thin thread of smoke rose from the fort's eastern edge, small at first, then thicker orange light, blooming behind the stockade. The attack had begun. Distant shouts carried on the wind, faint as crow calls, then sharper. Rifle cracks followed, spaced and deliberate. Kane's jaw tightened. The pouch hung empty now. He tied it closed anyway, fingers deliberate as though the motion itself could hold something together. Clara's hand rested near his on the rock, not touching, just close. She felt the tremor in his arm, small and quickly stilled. She understood this was not courage. It was the last tether cut. Neela's name would be spoken differently now by those who remained on the reservation, by those who had already turned away. Clean in memory, perhaps, but stained by the choice he made tonight. He exhaled once, slow and controlled. Neela would understand, he said. The words came quiet, almost lost in the growing crackle from below. Clara nodded. No tears. Only the steady press of her palm against stone. They slid down the slope together, boots scraping hands, finding purchase on rough outcrops. The paint and sorrel waited tethered in a shallow dip, ears pricked toward the distant gunfire. Kane untied them without hurry. Clara mounted the sorrel. He swung up on the paint. From another ridge farther east, Yuma stood motionless, arms folded, blanket across his shoulders against the night chill. He had followed without closing the distance. Now he watched them descend, two small figures, dropping toward the firelight and smoke. He made no move to stop them, no sign of judgment. He only bore witness, letting the sight settle into memory like ash into earth. The first screams rose from the fort-high, terrified human. Kane touched the paint's neck once. Then they rode down into the glow. The ledge behind them lay empty, the last of the ash already blending with the dust. The fort was a furnace now. Flames licked up wooden barracks, black smoke boiling thick and acrid, carrying the stink of burning pine wool and flesh. Screams cut through the roar. Women, children, soldiers caught half-dressed. Bullets snapped overhead like dry twigs breaking. Kane and Clara ran low through the chaos, keeping to the shadows thrown by collapsing walls. They reached the family quarters just as the roof sagged. Smoke poured from windows like dark water. Sergeant Rye stood in the doorway, carbine raised, herding civilians, out old women clutching shawls, a man with a bloodied arm, 3 small figures huddled against the far wall. Sadie, Maisie, Toby. Their faces were soot-streaked eyes wide with the same terror Clara had seen in the root cellar. Rye spun at the sound of boots. His carbine came up fast. Apache. The word cracked like a whip. The barrel leveled at Kane's chest. Clara stepped between them without thought. Arms out, palms forward. He's with me. He's helping. Rye's finger tightened on the trigger. Step aside, ma'am. That's the blood hunter. He planned this. A bullet from somewhere in the compound struck the wall beside them, showering adobe dust. Toby cried out. Clara did not move. Kane spoke low, steady. Shoot me later. Children burn now. Rye hesitated, 1 heartbeat, 2, then lowered the carbine a fraction. Practicality won over hate. He jerked his head. Inside. Move. They plunged into the smoke. Heat pressed like a hand against the face. Kane lifted Toby first, small arms, clinging face buried in Kane's shoulder. Clara took Maisie's hand. Sadie grabbed her sister's skirt. Rye supported an elderly woman who coughed wetly into her sleeve. They stumbled out, coughing eyes streaming. The yard was hell, bodies sprawled, horses screaming in the corral. Warriors moving dark and swift across the compound. Mato's voice carried once sharp command in Apache, then lost in the din. A rifle cracked close. Kane staggered left shoulder, blooming dark through his shirt. The bullet had torn flesh, not bone, but blood, soaked fast. He kept moving Toby still in his arms, guiding the boy toward the stone root cellar set apart from the flames. The heavy door stood open. Inside, barrels of flour and salt pork loomed in shadow. They crowded in. Rye slammed the door. The bar dropped with a dull thud. Darkness swallowed them, broken only by thin slits of light at the edges. Smoke seeped under the door, slow and insidious. Kane set Toby down gently. The boy clung to his leg. Kane pressed his right hand to the wound, warm, sticky. His breath came shorter, but his face stayed calm, almost detached. He remembered Neela in the snow of the long walk, carrying a child, not her own blood on her skirt from a soldier's bayonet, never crying out. She had kept moving. So did he. Clara knelt beside him, tearing a strip from her skirt hem. She pressed it to the wound without asking. Her hands shook, but her eyes were steady. Hold still. He did not flinch, only nodded once. Outside, the battle swelled, more shots, more screams, the crack of burning timber. The telegraph office lay across open ground, a small stone building near the administrative block. Smoke hid it half the time, but the wire still stood poles black against firelight. Rye wiped soot from his face. Relief's coming, if we can hold. Kane looked at the door. Telegraph. Send word. Rye snorted. Across that yard, you'll be shot before you reach it. Kane met his eyes. They will not shoot one of their own. Not right away. Clara's hand stilled on the makeshift bandage. She looked at him, blood on her fingers, now his blood. The fear in her eyes was not for herself. Kane rose slowly. The wound pulled fresh pain, spiking, but he straightened. Stay here. Keep them quiet. Clara stood too. I'm coming. He started to shake his head. She cut him off. You're bleeding. You need someone to watch your back. Rye looked between them, said nothing. Kane exhaled through his nose, then nodded once. They slipped out a narrow side ventstone, cold against skin, into the smoke-choked yard. Kane led low and fast, using burning debris for cover. Clara followed close, heart hammering against ribs. Behind them in the doorway's shadow, Yuma crouched unseen. He had slipped inside the perimeter, unseen, moving like smoke himself. He watched them go, two figures vanishing into the haze toward the telegraph office. He made no sound, no move, only watched, letting the sight carve itself deep. A warrior's shout rose nearby, closer now. The smoke thickened. The sun hung low, bleeding red across the smoke-choked yard of Fort Bowie. Embers drifted like slow snow, settling on scorched earth and broken wood. The main courtyard lay open now, bodies still where they had fallen, rifles scattered, the smell of powder and burnt flesh thick in the throat. The Apache warriors held the center horses, restless at the edges, lances glinting dull in the dying light. Kane stood alone in the middle of it all. Blood had darkened his shirt from shoulder to belt, and the makeshift bandage Clara had tied soaked through. He did not lean on the lance. He held it loose in his right hand, point-down shaft resting against the dirt. His face was calm, too. Calm eyes fixed on Matto. Matto sat his horse a few paces away, war paint streaked with sweat and soot. Behind him the others waited, silent, weapons, ready, faces hard with the weight of what they had seen. Matto's voice came low, carrying over the crackle of cooling fires. You betray blood for white ghosts. Kane did not flinch. He met the words without raising his voice. I saved what lives? Matto's eyes narrowed. Children grow into enemies. You know this. You let them live to kill us later. Kane's grip tightened on the lance, once brief, then eased. He remembered Neela's voice in the snow, keep what breathes. The rest follows. The memory cut deeper than the bullet had. He said nothing more. No defense, no plea. Only the steady rise and fall of his chest, slower now from blood loss. Matto studied him a long moment. Then he lifted his chin toward the east. Hoofbeats rolled in distant thunder, growing louder, the jingle of cavalry gear unmistakable. Colonel Boone's relief column. Close, too close. Matto turned his horse half away. The path you choose has no return. The words hung between them like smoke. Matto raised his lance, one signal, and the warriors wheeled. Horses surged forward, dust rising in a low cloud as they rode east toward the mountains. No shots fired, no backward glance, only the fading drum of hooves. Kane remained where he was. The yard emptied around him. Soldiers emerged from cover, Rye, among them carbine lowered now, face streaked black. Boone rode in at the head of the column, horse-lathered eyes scanning the ruin. He reined up sharp when he saw Kane. Rye stepped forward first. He got us to the telegraph. Sent for you. Without him, his voice caught rough. Without him, the kids would be dead, all of them. Boone looked down at Kane. Long, hard. Then he nodded once. Stand down. Kane did not move. Clara appeared from the root cellar doorway, Toby's hand in hers, Sadie and Maisie close behind. She stopped when she saw him. Blood stillness, the lance planted like a marker. Her breath hitched once, and then steadied. Kane looked at her. At the children. Their faces, pale eyes, wide, but alive. He let the lance fall point first into the dirt. It stood upright a moment, quivering, then toppled slowly. He turned without a word. Not toward the fort, not toward Clara. Toward the open desert west, where the sun had already set and the sky turned cold purple. His steps were measured deliberate, each one pulling at the wound. Blood dripped dark spots in the dust behind him. Clara started forward half a step, then stopped. Toby tugged her hand. She looked down at him, then back at Kane's retreating figure. From the far ridge, Yuma watched. Blanket still across his shoulders, arms folded. He had seen the feather taken, seen the children carried out, seen the lance fall. He did not move. He only stood, letting every detail settle into the place where memory lives, deep, unchangeable. The hoofbeats of the column faded into orders and shouts. Kane kept walking. The desert swallowed him inch by inch. The wind rose, carrying the last of the smoke away. The desert stretched empty at first light, sand still cool under the horses' hooves. A day's ride from Fort Bowie, the land flattened into a wide basin where nothing grew taller than a man's knee. Kane rode ahead on the paint, Clara behind on the sorrel. No words had passed since they left the fort's gate at dusk. The children stayed behind, Sadie, Maisie, Toby, safe now, in the hands of soldiers who would feed them and find kin. Clara had knelt to hug. Each one felt small arms tighten, then released. Kane had only touched Toby's shoulder once, light, then turned away. They rode slow. The sun rose behind them, throwing long shadows forward. Dust, lifted in thin spirals, caught. The light fell again. Kane reined in beside a flat boulder the size of a wagon bed. A faint scar ran across its face, dry channel where water had once run after rain. He dismounted without sound. The paint lowered its head to graze sparse grass. Clara stopped the sorrel a few paces back. She stayed mounted, watching. Kane knelt beside the rock. He drew the lance from its sling on the saddle shaft, scarred feather gone point, still sharp, but dulled by use. He set it flat on the stone. No ceremony, no chant. Just the quiet placement, hands steady despite the ache in his shoulder. The wound had crusted over in the night, pulling tight with every breath. He sat back on his heels. The sun warmed the stone beneath him. Wind moved low, stirring grit against his leggings. He stared at the lance a long time. Neela had held one like it once, shorter, lighter, when she taught him the rain words here, years before the soldiers came. She had shown him how to press the point into wet earth, how to speak low so the clouds would answer. The ground had been green then, had been green. Now it was dry as bone. Clara watched from the saddle. She saw the way his shoulders carried themselves straight but heavy, as though the weight had settled permanent. She felt the same in her own chest, a bruise that would not fade, the memory of blood on her hands, of children's faces lit by fire. She did not dismount, did not speak, only waited. Kane reached for the lance again. He lifted it point down and drove it into a crack in the dry channel. The stone resisted at first, then gave. He pushed until half the shaft stood buried. No full burial rite, no witnesses, no eagle feather, no kin to sing the words. Just the metal point sunk into earth that would never hold water again. He rose. The lance remained upright, a thin shadow against the rising sun. He looked at Clara then. Not long, just enough. His eyes held no question, no plea. Only the quiet acceptance of a man who had chosen and would carry it. Clara met his gaze. She felt the pull to speak, to follow, to hold, but she stayed still. The sorrel shifted beneath her, impatient. Kane turned west. He walked. No horse, no weapon save the knife at his belt. Boots left shallow prints in the sand. The desert took them almost at once. Clara watched until he was small against the horizon, then smaller still. She did not call out. She did not ride after, only sat reins loose in her hands, letting the wind pull strands of hair across her face. From a low rise half a mile east, Yuma stood. Blanket draped over one shoulder, arms folded. He had followed through the night, keeping distance. Now he watched Kane walk away, alone, unburdened, except for what he carried inside. Yuma made no move, no sound. He only stood until the figure vanished into heat shimmer, letting every step etch itself deep where memory lives. The wind rose higher, carrying fine dust across the plain. It whispered over the half-buried lance, over the dry channel, over the empty land. Clara turned the sorrel east, toward the fort, toward the children, toward whatever came next. The desert kept its silence. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening and for allowing this story to speak to your heart. The Wild West still holds countless truths, some painful, some tender, all worth remembering. Stay with us, subscribe, comment, and invite others to discover these untamed stories. From our hearts to yours, thank you for being part of this journey. Aviso legal, barra disclaimer. Each story shared here is produced for storytelling enjoyment. Certain scenes may include fictional or dramatized elements inspired by historical circumstances. Although AI tools assist us in visuals narration and script development, the emotional tone, editing, and quality control are conducted by people to ensure meaningful experiences. We fully uphold YouTube's policies, using no deceptive recreations or impersonations of real individuals. All creative resources are properly licensed. Unauthorized copying, re-uploading, or remixing is not permitted. Thank you for supporting the effort behind every episode we create.